Got it. Thank you. Yeah, so greetings from Nez Perce country. My name is David Moen, and it's a privilege to share with you this morning. I thought about kind of how to structure a quick thumbnail version of my story, and I think what I came up with was that I will just tell you a little bit about my sort of demographics information. And then I was up this morning looking at my bookshelf, and I just started pulling off books that have been inspirational and formational to me. And they are ecological books, they're spiritual books, and they're books on healing and growth. And so I want to start out or go through that book list with you in as quick a way as I can, and then talk about just my career path and how I came to this group. And so we can have time for questions and answers afterwards. So I encourage you to write questions down if you have any, something to write with, or if you want to take notes on the books I recommend or whatever. But I want to just share. So I was born into a family of a nuclear family with my older brother, and my parents divorced when I was 5, and my mom raised my older brother and myself mostly in Portland, Oregon. I was born in Seattle, Washington. And then I went on to, after high school in Portland, to further my education in Los Angeles, California. So I'm a West Coast guy, kind of through and through. And while I was in college, I went to Biola University. And while I was there, I think I tried to transfer almost every year that I was there to other schools, because it just didn't feel like a good fit. It didn't feel like home. I felt, not just the Northwest versus Southern California cross-cultural, challenge, but just in terms of my faith, it challenged my faith, but it also encouraged my growth. So basically, I grew up in the Covenant Church, in the Protestant Covenant Church, and going to Biola was a deliberate choice for me to kind of further my education in a context that was relevant and meaningful to me. But when I was there, I just grew kind of hardened to seeing how the political co-opting of faith was kind of taking place and forming with the George Bush administration, and how the right wing was really kind of active and present on campus, and fundamentalism. And that basically I withdrew and had kind of a real challenge at that time. But I met just enough people that were like stepping stones to get through that 4-year experience with my faith intact. And one of the books that really helped me is called The Myth of Certainty. And that goes over a lot of like Soren Kierkegaard philosophy, and introduced me to the subjective dimensions of faith in a relevant way. So anyway, I studied cultural anthropology, and I traveled abroad, mostly through Central America when I was in college. And I studied with a program abroad called the Global Stewardship Studies Program. And I met a wonderful mentor at that time named Chris Elisara, and he and his wife have just been truly instrumental in my faith and encouraging my growth in life. and they run this global stewardship studies program, in lots of different places. Anyway, the fact that I met just enough mentors and friends, I could probably count them on one hand, that got me through. I just feel very grateful looking back, having graduated from there and navigating that all with a lot of grace. Even though it was difficult, I felt there was kind of a desert experience of being nurtured in a desert. So anyway, after school, I primarily worked as a field biologist and a naturalist. So I taught outdoor school for a handful of years in Santa Cruz, a place called Mission Springs Conference Center. And in the summertime, when I would have off, I would go do bird work mostly. Birds have always been an interest of mine, and I minored in biology and did field studies and research on bird behavior. And so I got jobs doing restoration. My first field job was with Appomattox falcon recovery and on the coast of Texas with the Peregrine Fund. And it was a fascinating dive into an amazing, charismatic falcon that has just been brushed under the carpet in North America because its habitat got engulfed and swallowed by the cotton farms of Texas. And it is slowly recovering and has been reintroduced in a couple of wildlife refuges, these little postage stamps in these sea of cotton of habitat. And they're just, yeah, that was just a really amazing connection for me to look, to take a microscope to God's creation. And this particular animal has a social hunting behavior, and it's really amazing animal. So that really lit the spark for me to do the work that I do as a conservation biologist. And I've worked and traveled lots of different places for that work, bird work primarily. And the last internship that I had before I sort of launched off into grad school and did put more intention behind my career path, was in Big Sur on the Condor recovery program. It was kind of just in its early stages, but I got bit by this condor bug, is what I like to say, and took another deep dive into that species and really just fell in love with that animal. It's like a flying monkey, or human. Actually, they're just really, really intelligent, inquisitive, social. One curator at the Oregon Zoo, that a friend of mine who is involved with the breeding program, says that they remind him of giant parrots. They're like they're very gregarious, and they're just highly intelligent. So they're unique compared to any bird I've ever worked with, and that really struck my curiosity. So I went to graduate school in Portland at Portland State University and studied, what would it be like to recover condors in the Northwest? This is part of their historic range. The Oregon's like core in the sort of center of their historic range. And just at that time, there's a lot of synergy around this work with the Oregon Zoo coming on board as the fourth national condor breeder. And that energized my research as well. And so I looked into what that would mean, and the past, looking at the past to kind of prepare for the future. And that I did an interdisciplinary degree in science education, and that took me into a lot of conversation around what was that relationship like before it started being threatened. In other words, pre-contact Western North America, what were tribal relationships like with condor that were sustainable? Because they really didn't start disappearing at all until settlement in the West. And so just looking into what are the patterns of the contributing factors to decline, and what were the patterns of sustainability that we could learn from to recreate, because we've had a second chance to relate to that bird differently thanks to captive breeding. So how do we look at that relationship differently? You know, can we expect anything to change if the paradigm that caused the problem in the first place has not changed, and to try to find a solution for that problem, or do we need a paradigm shift? So it was a good exploratory, you know, research, and I essentially argued for the recovery, the Northwest recovery of condors, and looked at some of the tools that it would take to do that. And in doing that, it just led me to a lot of conversations with Indigenous leaders and elders in the region, and started networking with a lot of different inspiring tribal people, to sort of have that cross-cultural dialogue and look at things differently. So Albert Einstein, you know, is famous for having said, you can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created it in the first place. So what is, you know, what's the answer to solving for the pattern of extinction here? So anyway, I learned to tell the condor story, I learned to identify my story with Condor's story, I guess is a way to put it, and use that as a lens to talk about sustainability and the plight that we're on as an unsustainable society, and what does that mean that we have to do about it, or what can we do about it? So I'm largely an educator, and when it comes to that, I've given, you know, hundreds of presentations to hundreds of groups as both part of my job and on a personal level. I feel passionate about what I do, so I like sharing about it. But I've always just kind of been a bridge builder in the sense that, you know, much like I was at Biola talking about the importance of stewardship and creation care, and how we can incorporate that as a ministry, you know, to kind of use religious language to talk about our stewardship obligations as spiritual people. That didn't go over so well with, you know, the crowd there. I felt, you know, my friends were maybe the few people that understood that. And so I felt like I was a kind of a bridge builder in that way, talking about science and responsibility in a religious setting, and then working in the field as a scientist, talking about the importance of developing a spiritual life and a spiritual connection to the animals that we're working to restore, just made no sense to my colleagues. So I had to kind of, you know, I had it from kind of both sides, and that's how I've been able to understand, oh yeah, I'm a bridge builder. Like, the integration is a reality, and God's about it, and it's okay. So that's been kind of my calling, I guess. I could put it that way. So the books that I want to share with you have been inspiring to me along those lines. First, I think the only story, most of them are sort of self-inquiry books and such, but is The Education of Little Tree. If you have any of you read this book? Oh yeah, it's so good. It's just like chicken noodle soup, you know. It's like good food for the soul, and makes you just feel like, you know, like a kid again. You can see kind of the innocence and the connection of to nature from Cherokee standpoint. This relationship is very tender between this child and his grandparents who raise him, and that really was inspirational to me in college. The reason I bring it into focus is because it set the tone for the direction that I really wanted to cultivate in my life. And then I came across this book. It's called Earth in Mind by Orr. David Orr. He's a powerful think tank on sustainability issues. Maybe you've heard of him. But Earth in Mind really gave me a great perspective on the experience that I had in undergrad, where talking about these issues in an educational context was kind of marginal. And his big thesis is all education is environmental education. We have to do all education from a foundation of common understanding about how the earth works, how things have been set up to run, and how we can then build educational, specialties off of that common knowledge, so that whether we're a banker or, I don't know, a lawyer, an educator, a PE teacher, there's ways that we relate to the earth in a common way, in a sustainable way. So I really gelled with that. That really struck a chord for me, and particularly as an educator. And just pointing out how anemic our education system really is. And then this is another book along the spiritual category. It's called Holy Ground. And it's a gathering of voices on the care of creation. And this is, seems like some of you are familiar with it. It's just a great little pocket book to read a few different essays from deep thinkers on the topic of sanctity. I think that's something that is so important to me, that I grew up in a culture that has no instruction on. I understand sort of like holiness in church, or growing up in the church as a separate category, but I didn't understand, or I was never taught what that really translates to in terms of sacred objects, sacred locations, sacred life. So that book really kind of helped me understand that, and gave me an appreciation for the caliber of thinking that's going into an important topic. And also the criticism that it raised. I think one of the quotes in there I read from like an Irish priest in there was something along the lines like, we've studied nature to death, but we can't restore it. We can't keep ourselves sustaining on it, but we can sure measure the hell out of it. It's like there's a disconnect between what science is doing and the knowledge gathering that we're doing, which is all great, and then how that translates into caring actions for what we're studying, right? So that struck a real chord with me. Anyway, I'll just move a little quicker here. Jim Laktodowicz is an incredible retired fish biologist. He wrote Salmon Without Rivers. And this is his recent book called Salmon, People, and Place, and highly recommend it. It has given me more understanding about what it means to be a person of place, to find your identity in a location, which is what indigenous means, right? So that has also led to this great book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Yeah, maybe you are familiar. It's beautiful. It's just, she writes in such a gripping and graceful way to kind of highlight some themes that have been building on in my life. Then moving, I guess that was sort of the ecological list, but moving more in toward the spiritual list, some of the books that have really inspired me have been Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote this book called Anger, and I've had a lot of anger, especially as a young adult, and finding ways to embrace that and recognize like the goodness of it, but then to allow it to learn how to kind of master it and harness it for good, so that I can express it. That's good stuff, good medicine. It's another book similar. It's called A Still Forest Pool. It's kind of a reader on Buddhist meditation, and I've recognized there's a lot of chaos in my life. Growing up in a split home and having been diagnosed ADD, ADHD, I just have gravitated towards trying to understand, that still calm pool in my own life. I don't know how it's evaded me for so long, but I feel like I'm on track to cultivate, to walk the path toward that. So that book inspires. And along similar lines, here's a similar theme, right? The mountain of silence, and just being still, kind of that life verse for me, be still and know that I'm God. Mountain of Silence was written by Kyriakos Markidius. He's a Greek Orthodox sojourner who took a trip to Mount Athos. And he wrote about it in that book. And it introduced me to the Christian shamans of Mount Athos and the healers who enter into other dimensions through their spiritual life to kind of struggle in the gap for others and for humanity. And so I identified with that quite a bit as a bridge builder. And it's just full of sort of practical tools, like spiritual tools, that was really insightful for me. And this also complemented my journey towards Eastern Orthodoxy. Another book along those lines is called The Ladder of the Beatitudes. Jim Forrest wrote that, and it describes the Beatitudes in a way that I'd never understood them before, as a cohesive, linear path. And it all starts with, blessed are the meek. Well, blessed are the humble. And so in Orthodox teaching, there can be no spiritual progress without humility. So humility is the foundation. So that book really opened my eyes to some practical spiritual insight that was really revelatory for me. And then lastly, in that category is a book I've been reading, still not done with it, but it's called Healing Your Wounded Soul, Growing from Pain to Peace. And also written by an Orthodox priest, and also full of practical, psychological, beautiful kind of spirit, parallel psychology and spirituality themes that are just, mapping the wounded soul. And I've had to do a lot of that, and I'm still doing it. So those are some tools that have helped me. That brings me to the next sort of category, and moving from that into sort of the self-help, I guess, I don't know what you want to call it, but recognizing that, growing up in a culture that doesn't express grief, that doesn't value the reflection on death, that glorifies youth and wealth and all of that. This is a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. I think those are really, really critical topics, or it's a really, really critical thing for all of us to experience and learn about and collaborate on and create containers for, so that healing can happen, That's how I've found value in that book. And that has opened my eyes to, my journey has been really about opening my eyes to my own experience of trauma, and how to heal from that. And so This book is called It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who You Are and How to End the Cycle. My dad, bless his heart, he sent me that book. And just recognizing there's this thing called intergenerational trauma, that we inherit trauma that's unhealed from our parents and grandparents, etc. And I've seen those patterns, and I'm doing my best to break that cycle so my son can live a healthier, more present existence while he has his shot at the earth walk. This is another great book I came to called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, Malcolm Stern. And an icon for me in my faith walk was given to me by my spiritual father, and it's St. George. St. George's icon, if you're familiar, is him on as a warrior of light on a horse with a spear that goes through the mouth of the dragon. And that is an icon of this exact concept of slaying your dragons with compassion, because the spear is emblematic of the Holy Spirit. And so its tools, spiritual warfare essentially is kind of the concept there. And anyway, it has he's got a lot of practical advice for employing that approach. And again, it has to do with trauma. So I just got this book recently. I have only read the first part of it, but Gabor Mate, he's genius on topic of trauma. And this is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which borrows on a theme from Buddhist tradition of in Christianity, we might call it like the void, that only the God puzzle piece fits into. But that void is the hungry ghost. That's the mouth, the consumer that's not satiated and puts all kinds of addiction into its mouth until we recognize that we are not our trauma, and we turn the page on trying to heal and embrace it. So that's a really good clinician's insight. And he's also, good research, they say, is me search. So he really speaks to his own story of healing, and as a MD, and just has really sort of integrated personal perspective on things. It's really good so far. Anyway, you might know Brené Brown. She's a popular author. I just found this at Costco like last month, but Atlas of the Heart. I mean, what a cool book. Like the cover, just aside from the really artsy, but just the concept, I was like, okay, that's a book I'm interested in, because I'm reading her other book, which is called The Gifts of Imperfection. And I'm an imperfect gift all the way through, because the other book I'm reading is called The Gift of Adult ADD. And working with my counselor on that, it just gives me insight into kind of mapping my relational terrain from a wounded place, and then recognizing, how to surrender. And it's funny, like a lot of the concepts growing up as a kid in the church are sort of slowly beginning to make more sense on a deeper level. Being at the foot of the cross and laying things down, surrendering. This has been a theme for me lately. And then this is a great book. It's given me a lot of insight. It's adult attachment theory. It's called Attached, and just real practical. I'm really into practical stuff, right? So this is just about how we form attachment, either as an anxious attachment type, or a secure attachment type, or an avoidant attachment type. And pretty much everybody's within that spectrum. There are, disorganized attachment types, which are kind of all of the above, except for the secure. But anyway, I've experienced the dance of attachment as a secure or a anxious and an avoidant. And the closer one gets, the other one moves further back. That sort of intimate dance that in several relationships, and just not understanding it. But this gives me the nuts and bolts of it and helps me understand how to make different choices and move more towards wholeness, which I see, is guided by the Holy Spirit. And then last, I know it's a long book list. Thanks for entertaining me there. This is called It All Turns on Affection by Wendell Berry. Brilliant piece of work, because it does, for me, it resonates, and it's all about, like, I think what the spiritual life is about, which is how do we keep a soft heart? And there's ways to do that, very practical ways, like sharing chocolate or giving flowers or playing with kids, or, there's these different ways, worshiping, laying down, resting. There's these different ways of renewal and connection that keep us buoyant in our spirit, and I think that's the goal. Like Jesus said, the kingdom belongs to such as these, that the children be childlike. So this has been, a long, hard journey for me, interpersonally, and a lot of sort of failures and firings and friendship losses and divorce and just challenges, not unlike a lot of people, but it kind of amazes me that I'm still sort of at it without like a heroin addiction or something hardcore. And I feel like I've just been led along the way in just the right ways, little nuanced ways to walk the edge and not get swallowed up. So anyway, that leads to, I guess, after grad school and my story, I went to grad school to study what I learned as my last intern, which was condors, right? So I went and worked as a condor field biologist in Central California, back on the same project in Big Sur. And my colleague, shortly after I got there, my colleague died in the field with me. It's just we were just releasing several condors and looking at a storm coming in. And anyway, he turned the corner driving back to the cabin at our field station, and oak branch flew out of the sky from a terrible wind that came up, and it landed on him, and that was that. So that was kind of a real shakeup for me, and learning to fill his shoes. I took over as a field crew supervisor, worked there for the next 4 years, essentially, and moved on to work here for the Nez Perce tribe, doing essentially spearheading their effort to recover condors to Hell's Canyon, which is in the heartland of their home territory. So we're working at it. In the meanwhile, there's been a lot of ups and downs and challenges with, politics and the state of the earth and health of the land, and things just seem to be unraveling. And I kind of see the wonky polarity of global climate disruption as a reflection of the wonky polarity of our politics, and the way those two relate is a key interest of mine. But when I got to the tribe here, I just took another deep dive in learning to kind of shift paradigms, right? and learn that, we are nature, that we are not separate from nature. As much as we like to create an illusion of that with industrial Western culture, draw lines about where you can ravage forests and where they need to be protected. It's just what the word that has been taught to me here is the word is soyapo. The soyapo is not just the Mimipu name for white folks, but it's also a mindset, and the mindset is a fragmented mind. So it's also what I reference as the colonial mind. And it's the people who like to set up fences everywhere, right? And that describes a culture of trauma, the shattering that trauma produces in an individual, but it also has collective resonance, and that has been unleashed on this land in a big way, since settlement. So just learning about that in the new context of work has been really enlightening to me. Helps me talk about Condor recovery as in a very different way, which I'm happy to share about at some point. But anyway, there's a lot of unfolding going on of good in the midst of this unraveling. And I feel like this group is part of that unfolding. And the true colors of things are coming out, and things are being laid bare and made obvious in lots of ways. As I feel like this sort of propped up system is really showing how weak it is and ready to fall over. Anyway, I'm interested in community connections, and that's really what my job is about. I do outreach for a hunting stewardship program to help birds of prey by helping hunters switch from lead ammunition to copper ammunition. And that's my whole gig here. And that's the way that we will help pave the way for condors to return to the landscape, is to have lead-free landscapes. So that's the primary culprit for why they are not sustaining themselves, lead poisoning. So that's what I work on. I'm interested in rebuilding, renewing, restoring, and reimagining a new culture, a different way of being in this embodiment of U.S. culture that we inhabit. I mean, I know that's got a lot of nuances, but what I mean in generally is like, how do we get to a regenerative culture that gives back? We've belonged to an exploitative culture for so long that only takes. How do we give back, and what does that look like? And I think that's like kingdom of God stuff, right? So anyway, last two thoughts I want to share. I have two totem animals I want to share with you that have inspired me as an Orthodox person of faith. The more I look into the depths of that history and teaching, spiritual tradition, the more I am taught like that all is icon, right? That life is metaphor, and to understand things in a spiritual way, we have to understand like the value of metaphor. And so beaver is a totem animal that resonates with me as a spiritual sort of not so much a guide per se, but just an emblem, like a road sign along the way. And so I move real fast, my mind moves real fast. And to get into my body, I really need to slow down and get grounded. So beaver, he meanders with the river, with the creeks, and he's an ecosystem engineer, which is what I do. I'm trying to bring a new vision for how we relate to the land in a healthy way. And so for me, like he's slow and smooth is fast. That's kind of the mantra I get from him. And that I distribute nutrients in the meander of flow. And so I have a little like beaver on my desk, you know, that helps me remember to move slow and to trust the current, you know. And then of course, Condor, there's a lot of teaching that can be done with him and his life story. But one of them is that he's the great recycler, right? He's an obligate scavenger, and he only pursues animals that are deceased in order to bring life. So he's a transformer. He transforms death to life on the landscape on large scales. Like one time I was in a condor nest in Big Sur, and it was in an old growth redwood.
If this could be the final piece, David, just so we have a quick time to to share a little back with you and
okay, no problem. Anyway, the whole cavity smelled like a whale blubber, like those condors have been feeding on a beached whale. So, you know, to think about how ocean derived nutrients get into old growth forests, you know, they're a mechanism for that. Anyway, just that there's, maybe I'll share the last story about Condor another time. It's the story of Condor and Eagle that comes out of South America, the Quechuan people. That has a lot to do with our experience in this place and time and kind of humanity's evolution, if you will. Anyway, I'm just trying to understand, you know, how to kind of make my faith more place-based, and I'll leave it at that.
wow,
Yeah, thank
David.
you for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we can